And welcome back to this final session of Tech Days Online today. We're just going to have a look at App Controller, I think, in this last session, and also at Data Protection Manager, which may have been given away by the fact that the Data Protection Manager slide is on the screen at the moment. Joined by Andrew. Andrew is our private cloud guy. Andrew, Data Protection Manager?
Well, it's perhaps the least exciting thing in the world, but I get beaten up at events if I don't mention it because the people who use it absolutely love it to death.
Absolutely, yes. It's always quite strange when you go out there and we start to meet people who really love their backup software.
It's very odd.
Very odd, but we come across it all the time.
Very, very odd indeed. Right, so there's a couple of things to mention about it. First of all, what is it if you haven't seen it before? And I think I've just got a very simple slide here. It's a way of backing up your Microsoft stuff. I can't really put it any easier than that. And that stuff
can be SQL Server, it can be Exchange, it can be Dynamics, it can be any of the products that you see on the left-hand side and more.
And okay, so what we're doing there is we're using technologies like VSS, and we're taking an initial image of a database or a whole virtual hard disk or system state, and then we're keeping track of the blocks that have changed and then putting them into our archive, so that we can replay those back. So you can get back to 15-minute snapshots of say a SQL Server environment, and then you've only got to replace, say, 14.5 minutes maximum of logs. So it's quite quick then to get your SQL Server back on environment back on side. The SQL Server actually is kind of an odd thing here because we're obviously writing all that stuff out to Data Protection Manager, but Data Protection Manager itself uses SQL Server. Ah,
okay. So presumably you have to use Data Protection Manager to protect your Data Protection Manager data.
You kind of do. That's not quite as odd as what you actually do, though. What you actually do, the way you protect Data Protection Manager is to use Data Protection Manager.
Right.
You have another one.
Excellent.
You have another one somewhere else, just protecting it. It's kind of really, really sad. So we have the idea of online snapshots, and also Data Protection Manager sometimes likes to work with tapes, and some of my friends have done some clever spoofing to get it to think that it's writing to tape, but it's actually writing to some disks, so some JBOD disks in a random box. That's how good friends at Black Marble do that.
Ah, okay.
Because they were talking to me about this the other day. So the idea is you've got a consistent, simple UI to back up Microsoft stuff. It could be your Active Directory, it could be system state of particular very precious Windows 7 machines. That could be your, I don't know, personal desktop in the VDI environment.
Absolutely.
We looked at this morning, the CEO's desktop. Maybe you want to look after that really well. I don't know. And then you're able to delegate administration of that particular recovery back to the kind of the Exchange admin, the SharePoint admin, and so on. And the archiving capabilities in here are far more subtle, in fact, in some ways, than they can be in the tools themselves. A good example might be that if I wrote a draft of an email or a document in SharePoint, I can get back that draft, not just the email that went out the door. And that can be important in some compliance scenarios. Or the fact, oh my God, I meant to not overwrite that, and can you get it back for me? So you can go and navigate that. So we can delegate control. So not really much happened in Data Protection Manager 2012. Of all the System Center 2012 suite, it changed the least. One of the things that users asked for was they wanted one console to manage several DPM servers, and we've got that now. But other than that, poor old DPM just has to keep playing catch up. So when we introduced Windows Server 2008, R2 for example, we introduced something called cluster shared volumes. Well, poor old DPM didn't know about that, so we had to have a new release of DPM to get it to work with cluster shared volumes. What's your favourite feature in Windows Server 2012, Simon?
That would be data deduplication.
Ah, and then you're thinking, well, I need to change DPM to make it dedupe aware. We were talking about this yesterday, but just to be clear, data deduplication is what is it?
Well, it's technology for basically looking at all the data on disks and taking away any areas of that data where it matches identically to another area of the disk. It can save you vast amounts of disk space. Fantastic feature. Obviously, what happens with that is you could take as we were showing yesterday, take a 12 gigabyte volume that contains 15 gigabytes worth of actual data, back that up to a 15 gigabyte backup, go to restore it back to that 12 gigabyte volume, and you don't have enough space to do the restore. So in that case, DPM would need to be updated to be deduplication aware, something which is coming in Service Pack 1.
So in other words, we need to take that deduplication information and put it into the backup. Obviously all the backup providers are going to have to do that kind of technology, but it leads me on to the whole SP1 stuff actually, and I might well come back to that later. So that's the key thing that's going to change in DPM in SP1. Again, it's not going to be a significant UI change, it's just going to be that. You can download that beta now and you can see how it works with deduplication.
Absolutely.
We should do that. We should do that. Okay, so that's a quick look at how deduplication works. So the other thing, as I say, is the way you do your DR is you have a DPM server sitting at your DR site, looking at your DPM server on your main site, for example. Okay. One of the other things that people have struggled with up until now is that you couldn't easily run Data Protection Manager inside a virtual machine. And I come on to this again for two reasons. One is we've got scale and performance inside virtual machines now, so tools like DPM can be a bit memory hungry. So can some of the other System Center suite. But here's another thing. I mentioned that DPM likes talking to tape drives because it will work with the major tape vendors, and a lot of people have fiber channel tape.
Ah, bit of a problem inside of a virtual machine in 2008 R2.
It is, but not in Server 2012. So you can access your fiber channel tape archives from a virtual machine, so you can actually put DPM into a virtual machine if you want to, Simon. So that's quite important too. Where's my clickery thing? There we go. So this is making the point about offlaying that maybe through the cloud to somewhere else. So you have your offline DR site. Okay, so I'm not quite keeping up with the builds there. So I've gone around some of the key components of System Center there, Simon. Before I come to the last section, I think there's probably a couple of things I want to touch on. One, Service Pack 1 is going to change significant amounts of this. We've seen a few changes inside Virtual Machine Manager. I've just talked about Data Protection Manager. Clearly, all of these have got to run on Server 2012. They're also going to run on top of SQL Server 2012. And that itself gives us some interesting opportunities, because as a SQL expert, I'm quite liking availability groups, which is where we can take a group of databases and replicate those databases somewhere else. If those databases were your System Center databases, this would give you the opportunity to have a DR solution and a high availability solution for System Center. And if you're relying on System Center for your business, you need to make it highly available. You might, for example, run the SQL Server database in some form of cluster, and a lot of the System Center components can be scaled out, load balanced, and made highly available, so you can have resilience to it. But it should be nothing more than a particular piece of System Center has gone flat over on its face. You've got a backup of certificates that go with the database. You install, apply the certificates, point it at the database, and you're back working again with your old data. So that's your DR in a nutshell before people ask me about this. Other things in Service Pack 1 obviously is that we've got Windows 8 out there, so Config Manager's clearly got loads to do there.
Config Manager takes the load there and is updated so that we can deliver AppX packages, so that we can deliver Windows 8 as an operating system, so that we can also do things like build those Windows to go sticks directly from within Config Manager. And
given that one of the ways you might want to deploy Windows 8 is in a VDI environment, then we'd expect to see Virtual Machine Manager being much more VDI aware. It's also got to be aware of the shiny new opportunities for virtualization, replication, live migration, shared nothing, even just being able to put 64 cores into a virtual machine.
So essentially what you're saying is all of the cool stuff that lands in Windows Server 2012, in order to enable that with System Center, we need the SP1 to land, which will be coming very soon.
Well, it just won't work otherwise, Simon. Yeah. You won't even be able to install onto it.
Absolutely.
So you can see I've been running some RTM code, some non-SP1. I've only got a limited stand-up of SP1 beta at the moment because, well, frankly, it's bad timing. This afternoon talking about it, I'll be brutally honest with the audience, we're in a kind of a transition here at the moment of moving over to the SP1 demos, but we've been doing a lot of Server 2012, so I kind of wanted to show a little bit of that today. And I've kind of got rid of my old R2 environment, so in the process, one of the many casualties of my laptop dying the other day. So because it's a service pack, you aren't going to have to, if you've already got System Center 2012, you're just going to get service pack, you're going to carry on going, that's going to be fine. If you haven't got System Center 2012, then A, you want to evaluate it, but B, then you might ask me about licensing. And the licensing is interesting because it's licensed in exactly the same way as Windows Server 2012. In other words, we have a standard and a data center edition. They're the only, actually the only two for System Center. And the only difference between those two suites is how they're virtualized. With Data Center Edition, you would install the System Center suite, license it for a host, and all the virtual machines on that host are then under management. They can be backed up. You can run the service manager. You can run ops manager, see what they're doing, orchestration tasks between them, manage them with virtual machine manager, so on and so forth. Everything's under management. And the license works by dividing the number of CPUs on that physical server by 2. So if you've got a quad processor box, you'd need 2 data center licenses, a system center on that box, and then you go around all your physical hosts and license it that way. If you aren't into virtualization, which means you're not really into the private cloud, and you want to use System Center anyway, then you would buy Standard Edition, and you are licensed to look after, I think it's, and I'm just trying to work out how this works, 2 virtual machines per host, because you buy it per 2 processors. Yeah. So it's exactly, and Windows Server's licensed in exactly the same way. Config Manager is a little different because, and there are also license implications for managing other devices. Those switches, there's a special device, I think, license for pointing at your Cisco switches and so on and so forth, which is a trivial sum compared with the actual license of the thing. So you would buy one of those things per Cisco switch, a Linux VM. No, Linux doesn't matter. Well, it depends where Linux is, because it would be, if it's in a virtual machine, you're covered if it's on the host that you've licensed. Do you see what I'm saying? So it doesn't matter about the operating system, I think is what I'm trying to get to very, very badly there. So finally, in the last few minutes, what I wanted to do then is kind of
bring it all back together. Have a look at the tooling so that you can manage the cloud as a whole.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. So let's do that. So we've seen this service model. This is a service in System Center Virtual Machine Manager, but it's now showing up inside Operations Manager, which is just showing that kind of joined up approach going on there, because that's what we're trying to measure the performance of. That's why we've stood it up that way. And also, because I'm monitoring it now, I then know that it's not working very well. So then I could issue a request via Orchestrator to go and talk to the service deployment and spin up more stuff.
Okay.
So I could just make it self-healing. Now I could optionally route that via the service desk so that we are raising an alert. That's going to depend on the culture of your organization. So we can see what it is, and we can also see it as a service in Service Manager as well. And then we can anchor that to service level agreements. So it's all about services. We're a service industry. So when it comes to integration, if I look at Service Manager and Orchestrator over in the middle of my System Center world, and then I start actually wiring it up. Well, clearly they talk to each other. And the way they talk to each other is you have a connector in Service Manager that talks to the web service that I talked about. Orchestrator puts out a web service, and all of the runbooks that you published show up in there in a folder hierarchy, which you can then navigate from inside Service Manager. So if you had your production runbooks on an Orchestrator book, on an Orchestrator server, Service Manager will pick those up, and as you add new ones in, it will refresh and show you those. You would then anchor those into service requests. That's what I'm talking about. So we can see that we can plug loads and loads of different connectivity in here, two-way communication between all of these tools. So Service Manager can prod Virtual Machine Manager if necessary, by self-service directly if it wants to, or you can do it via Orchestrator. We can get configuration items and alert incidents from Operations Manager and from Configuration Manager into Service Manager. So that gives us that cohesive CMDB, but it also means people don't have to go racing around looking for things. So we can actually see the incident log number, so on inside the service, so we know where to go and look in Operations Manager. So we talk about having lots of tools, and that can be confusing, but in a large organization, you might well have different people looking at this. The desktop guys are going to clearly have their noses in Operations Manager, where the infrastructure guys are going to be in Ops Manager. And the data center admins themselves might just be in Virtual Machine Manager, and so it goes on. Yeah, and obviously the backup stuff going on as well. So we've got all of this different stuff, and also let's just re-emphasize the fact we're talking about third-party apps here as well. So a lot of communications going on there with Orchestrator too. So then what we're able to do is to start to Yeah, get off. Pick all of that information up and put it into a separate part of Service Manager, which I haven't talked about till now, a data warehouse. Now, as a BI guy, I know what a data warehouse is. It's a warehouse for your data. Yeah, and like a warehouse, it has a loading bay, and then what you do is you put stuff away, and that's how a data warehouse works. So in the background, it puts stuff away, and what that does is it puts it into a reporting structure that makes it very easy to design dashboards and reports off, and also very, very performant. But that has to be running on a separate virtual machine. If you're doing it in virtual machines or a separate host, you can't install those two roles on the same machine because they're both pretty processor intensive. It's designed for enterprise, Simon. Sorry, you were going to say?
I was going to say that's because they're using the same agent infrastructure underneath, presumably.
Well, no, it's more a performance thing, but it's an installation thing. It'll blow out if you try and install the two on the same side. We've got extensive reporting here out of the box, but you can obviously go and write your own, or you can go and talk to some business intelligence specialist or partner in System Center, and they'll write you a suite of extra reports. And you can obviously, because it is SQL Server, you could ignore those reports and you could bubble them up into maybe you're using some other BI platform, and you could get the data out and surface it up in there. But out of the box, we're going to give you reporting services, analysis services, because you've already in your System Center license, you have a standard edition of SQL Server included, so you can just use that. So you can have those absolutely anywhere. So if we think about what's happening today, before we lived in the System Center world, our incident request, our little pink piece of paper, you're going to like this, just randomly kind of whizzes around all over the place without really any control. Who is looking after that?
That looks very similar to processes that I've implemented in the past.
It is. Looks like one of your PowerPoint animations as well, Simon.
It certainly does.
And it usually ends up back where it started with no one sorting anything out. So what we want to be able to do with automation is say, well, you know what, that process just needs to be a little smarter. We go to the first line, it goes into configuration management, which then tells second line to look at it, which goes into testing and diagnostics. We update the infrastructure, and then it goes back into the users as being a resolved incident. So a much more sort of controlled process, repeatable, and traceable and monitorable and discoverable and lots of nibbles, basically at the end of the day. So that's how I kind of see us transforming it. So over the last few hours we've had a look at different bits of System Center. I've hoped that I've managed to show you that we can scale things. I've hoped that I've been able to show you how we can make things agile, how we can provision self-service without IT losing a grip of the whole thing. And that all of this requires some careful plumbing, some design and configuration.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's really key to point out here is this is a relatively easy infrastructure to build, but it does require you to have some specialist knowledge of it, because you are going to need to be a private cloud specialist in order to be able to build out something like this. This is a fully integrated private cloud where everything is going to work together. And that requires people who have a specialist set of skills at integrating all of those points around that infrastructure.
Is that a plug for certification, Simon?
It is a little bit of a plug for the certifications, absolutely. So there is obviously the MCSE in private cloud, which builds on the 3 core Windows Server 2012 exams, extends those into the System Center domain, and actually allows you to build all the plumbing around all these separate components. We could not, in a 3-hour session, cover everything that you'd need to know there. It's just a little teaser to kind of bring the things together, show you some of the possibilities, some of where they do start to come together. If you did want to go down that route, you are talking about a set of specialisms that really will require you to do about 6 or 7 weeks worth of training in order to be absolutely frosty on every single element.
Yeah, and the exams I think are 40267, 40268, just to do my train spotter kind of deep knowledge.
Absolutely.
One's
410, 411 and 412.
And those are the other 3 for MCSA for server. So, but this is all about bringing all this stuff together. System Center does sort of deliver on that promise of the private cloud. It's what we obviously use internally. You'd expect us to say that, but absolutely we do. We do it at some considerable scale. It is a huge career out there, and we can not only manage our stuff, we can manage everybody else's stuff, because we live in a world of stuff that is just hard to manage. And what we should be moving away for is less of that reaction in that previous slide, where we're running around like headless chickens and getting into more of this design and architecting your private cloud using the tools that we've showed this afternoon that say that actually it can be a little tricky to install with the prereqs, particularly if you're playing with the SP1 beta, because they've concentrated on putting the features in, not on actually how easy it is to stand those up. So it's a little rough around the edges there, and there are a couple of bugs in it, but those will obviously be fixed. System Center 2012 is a pretty stable product. But then you're going to spend a lot of time thinking, well, what runbooks can I write today? How do I create those service templates? How do I tune my management packs and so on and so forth? So I think we're probably, well, we're about 4 minutes under, but I think we're probably about there.
I think there's a man with a Surface.
But there is a man with some questions.
To run that in. Let's just,
so we can, is that a man with a Surface? Oh, it's out.
Grab the Surface.
We're just grabbing the Surface. If you haven't seen a Surface today, I've just got the keyboard here. You can have that.
Thank you. Not very useful.
Alan Florence, what licenses are required for a physical server that wish to monitor? Okay. I think what you're saying is I license the physical server.
Yep.
And then I can manage everything, all the VMs and the physical server. Mm-hmm. If I just want to monitor the physical server and there's no VMs on it, then I need the standard license of System Center, and I can use all the tools. Hopefully that helps, Alan. And if you want to drop us an email direct, if that hasn't answered your question.
Then we've got a question from Mark Wilson asking us, hello Mark, asking us if we can clarify the situation with the System Center products, and do we need an SP1 for each product? Well, the answer for that is yes and no. Yes, you do need an SP1 for each product, but all of those service packs will be released at exactly the same time, and therefore it is just one service pack for System Center. You don't have to think of them as separate service packs for each product, but depending on what parts of the product you've deployed, you will just have to deploy that service pack to each one. Yeah,
there will obviously there are separate binaries, there are separate installs. It is just classified as SP1. I'm going to kind of guess what I'm talking about here, James. You're talking about using SQL Server 2012. There's no dependence. You don't have to use SQL Server 2012 to run SP1, but you do. You need to use 2008 R2, I think, is the version that has to be there. Because bear in mind, this is a service pack release. But if you want to use SQL Server 2012, you can. Okay, a lot of companies are moving to that, so there's no dependency. Nice, can't take every trick.
No, absolutely, it's a nice little just to do that again.
Yes,
it's a nice little noise, isn't it?
I'm reminded of an advert a long time ago, and I just realised I shouldn't have said it.
No.
Anyway,
so last few slides. Click through.
Indeed, I think we're about done there. Keep dropping this thing, Simon. So we are going to get rid of these kind of processes, and if we now think about, and I'm just going to let this run on through. It's just a way of having a proactive process where we start to have our data center self-healing, rather than waiting for somebody to phone us up and tell us that the whole thing has fallen flat on its face.
Yeah.
If we see a server is filling up, Virtual Machine Manager can move from one, Virtual Machine Manager will move VMs automatically for us, even without the rest of System Center. If Ops Manager sees that a Virtual Machine Manager is in, a virtual machine or a physical machine is in trouble, it could maybe launch an orchestrated process via Service Manager to let us know it's happened, but only pass it for action to somebody if the remediation that we've designed doesn't work properly as intended. So we can do a lot more self-healing, even allowing for the fact that systems like Server 2012, to a certain extent, self-heal in their own right anyway. Okay, so we have actually come to the end of the day, in fact, and we've got through to the end of the set of slides. Just wanted to get Andrew to click through to those so that we could just see what was there. All of the slides that you'll have seen for the past 48 hours on both day one and day two of Tech Days are going to be made available to you using the UK TechNet blog, so that we can get all those slides and details out there, including any other links to any extra places that we need to point to. Also, if you've raised questions and we haven't been able to answer them live up here during the days, then we will actually make sure we get answers back to you about those various questions that you've asked, if we have your contact details to do so. So try System Center 2012, the beta now. Get ready for production when it comes out in January. We're going to get ready for production. We'll be doing System Center camps next year in January. That's kind of what I'm building in my spare time at the moment, where we'll actually get you doing real stuff in System Centre. You can come along to those. So if you want to know more, I think we've also got Wally Mead over.
We do. There's a Wally Mead
Config Manager
event.
fans, we've disappointed this afternoon.
Yep, there are a few people who wanted to see some Config Manager. Luckily, we have Wally Mead coming over from the product team in a couple of weeks' time, so you'll be able to get some details of that. We'll push those out through the UK TechNet blog as well. The last thing that remains for me to do is just to thank all of the moderators that we've had online over the past 48 hours, just answering your questions, bringing those questions through to us at the front of the room. Also to thank our wonderful film crew that have been in the room with us for the past 2 days. Occasionally they've yawned because they have obviously been a little bit stuck doing some of this very dry server stuff with us.
But the upside is they can get certified now.
Absolutely, they are now fully able to get certified in all of this Windows Server 2012 with Windows 8 and this System Centre private cloud stuff. Thank you very much for watching for the past 48 hours. We've been Simon May and Andrew Fryer, and also just to thank David Noodleman, who helped us with the Windows 8 session this morning. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.